Hello everybody, Mannix here. Got a little firearm versus video for you right here, right now. But first, feel free to subscribe, hit that little bell notification if you do not want to miss weekly knife and gun videos. We're going to be talking very briefly about manual or pump action shotguns going up against semi-automatic shotguns. And just for clarification, this semi-automatic shotgun down here happens to be magazine fed. This manual shotgun happens to be pump action, but magazine fed, pump action, or manual shotguns do exist, just like tube fed semi-automatic shotguns also exist. These just happen to be the two I have for an example right here. These both also happen to be bullpup shotguns, a little bit unusual. They're just loaded behind where the trigger is, as opposed to having the magazine up here, we have it back here, and just like this Kel-Tec KS7 up here, instead of the shells normally being loaded in front of the trigger, they're behind the trigger. But I don't think that really makes a difference for this video in particular. Long story short, a semi-automatic shotgun is powered by the force that comes from firing the shells themselves. This is a Hudson Escort BTS-12, by the way. So again, magazine loaded, not loaded at the moment, not chambered, no shells. This one is tube fed. Not loaded either. If we were to load a semi-automatic shotgun, again, this one happens to be magazine fed. We got 5 12-gauge snap caps in here. So we'd put it in the first round, just like so, and we'd fire. If that was a live round, it would go boom. And what you would have seen if it was a live round, this lever, this whole mechanism up here, would slide back and the spent shell would extract and the new shell would load into place. But mine happened to get stuck a little bit because these snap caps are starting to kind of get deformed on me. But there we go. That would all have happened in one motion if we pulled the trigger with a live 12-gauge round, properly loaded. The reason it did not do that on its own was because it's a semi-automatic shotgun. Semi-automatic shotguns typically rely on the power that comes from the explosion of the round you fired itself. That would have blew back that whole mechanism, extracted the spent shell, and loaded in the new round, assuming you have another round ready to go in the magazine. A pump action shotgun, on the other hand, let's just load a couple in the tube here. So we loaded our first one, go into the shell lift there, fire, and the gun would look just like this. Nothing would blow back, nothing would happen. It would have to wait for us to manually pump out the old spent shell we just fired, and then in unison load the new shell from the tube or magazine, whatever the method of loading the gun happens to be. In goes the new one, fire, continue. So again, semi-automatics rely on the power from the shells themselves, while pump actions or manuals do not rely on them whatsoever. They rely on you manually pulling back or doing whatever is required to the mechanism in order to get that whole process going, extracting the spent shell and loading in the new one. So which one's better? It's always what it boils down to in these debates, right? Which one's the better one? Well, neither one's really better than the other. It's just up to preference, and it also depends on how that gun in particular, with whatever mechanism we're talking about at the moment, happens to be designed and engineered, how well executed it is. Personally, when it comes to reliability, I like pump actions just a little bit more, but not a whole lot more. There's some amazing semi-automatic shotguns out there that work virtually flawlessly. Every time you pull the trigger on those things, they go bang, bang, bang. Spent shells fly out flawlessly. New shells go in seamlessly. Repeat. No issues whatsoever. There's no other steps. There's no additional things you have to do in order to get the gun to fire the next round. Pretty much as fast as you can pull the trigger. When it comes to shotguns, you don't really get a whole lot more simple than that. Pump actions, or any manual mechanism on a shotgun, is 2 steps. You fire, pump, fire, pump, fire. You have to remember to do that. Not only do you have to remember to pump the shotgun or move the mechanism however it's supposed to be moved or operated, you have to do it properly. Short stroking is a thing. What if you did not pump this all the way? Let's say if you pumped this incorrectly in a stressful situation, you didn't make it all the way back, you could cause a jam. You did not give it a positive enough stroke in order to properly extract the spent shell and load in the new one. And then you try to close it up, you could cause a jam. It's something you consciously have to remember to do. Semi-automatics, you don't gotta remember to do shit. You just pull the trigger, that's it. It does the work for you. Or does it? That's where the debate usually comes in. A lot of people do not like the semi-automatics in comparison to the manuals because something completely against your will, completely against your dexterity, your skill, your knowledge, something within the gun itself could be wrong. Maybe something's not oiled properly. Maybe something's failing. Maybe something's defective. Some internal mechanism inside the shotgun may be having a problem or is not maintained well enough. What if you pull the trigger, the only thing you can really possibly do, and the gun jams? It fires, but the old shell may not extract. Sometimes the spent shell halfway extracts, but gets jammed because you did not get a positive enough stroke on the mechanism itself. But again, that's against your will with a semi-automatic. All you can do is pull the trigger. The mechanism is up to God. So it's kind of a peace of mind thing and a speed thing. Generally speaking, you can potentially fire a semi-automatic shotgun a lot faster than a pump action shotgun or any manual shotgun. It's just pull the trigger, pull the trigger, pull the trigger. That's it. It's not pull the trigger, pump, pull the trigger, pump, pull the trigger, pump. And again, with a pump action or any kind of manual gun, not only do you have to do that additional step in order to chamber the new round, extract the old one, you have to do it properly. If you do it too quick, you short stroke, you're going to have an issue. Again, semi-automatics, you completely remove that liability of user error. But again, we introduce new errors such as the gun itself causing an error, which may or may not really be in your control. Now, there are maneuvers and there's things you can do and learn. If there is a jam on you, if something comes up like that, you can just manually pull that lever back all the way. There's various techniques to clear jams, and you have to learn these procedures because you have to be prepared for these things to come up, just like they can happen with the pump actions. But more or less, again, issues happening with semi-automatic shotguns are kind of against your will, as opposed to the issues happening with manual shotguns more or less being caused by user error. As long as you have long positive strokes on your pump actions or manual shotguns, and you know how to operate them properly, and you do so flawlessly, especially considering you may be in a stressful situation if that comes up, you'll have no issues with the pump actions. You have good old reliability. There's less parts, less things that could potentially go wrong with a manual or pump action shotgun because of how simple their mechanisms are and how it really just requires your hand or your force to be doing what it has to be doing in order to get the gun to work. Simple as that. Semi-automatics, again, functionally, they are a lot more simple than a manual gun. It's just pull the trigger. That's it. The gun does the rest of the work for you. But you are, again, relying on the gun to work properly in order for that to actually happen. If both mechanisms are working flawlessly, working perfectly fine, no issues whatsoever, the semi-automatics, you could argue, are better than the manual or pump actions because, again, more simple and faster potentially. But that's if and only if it is working the way it's supposed to be working. But generally speaking, semi-automatics do work the way they are supposed to work. If you get some chintzy, cheap, no-name brand shotgun that's semi-automatic, you might be rolling the dice there a little bit. You may need to rely more on your semi-automatic gun being broken in more. You may need to oil it and clean it more often than a pump action, says me. But semi-automatics still work very, very well, generally speaking. But in my experience, they're not quite as reliable as manual or pump action shotguns, especially if you get cheap ones. This gun I got out of the box was having lots of issues, jamming, failures to extract, failures to feed, until I oiled it and started using it after putting 100 rounds through it or so. It hasn't had issues since, but we'll see. I can't guarantee that it won't. What if that one day I actually had to use it to defend my life and I got a jam? Can I prepare for that? I don't know. The pump actions I'm generally more confident with, but in a stressful situation, again, you might be trembling, you might be shaking, and maybe you will fail to actually pump that back all the way in short stroke and cause an error yourself, and you pull that trigger after thinking you reloaded it correctly, but the gun does not go bang. That also could happen. There's pros and cons to each. I don't think there's a clear winner here. Again, just to sum up, personally, I think the pump actions and the manual shotguns are a little bit more reliable, but they also rely more on you and can succumb to user error a lot more. Semi-automatics, faster and more simple, less things you have to remember and less things the user has to do correctly in order for them to continue to fire and cycle. But other than that, they don't quite have the same reliability and simplicity as a manual shotgun would. But they both have their place. They're both great. I love them both. That's why I have both of them. That's why I use and fire both of them. What do you think? Do you have a preference? Do you like pump actions or semi-autos more? Are there any advantages and or disadvantages to each that I missed in this video? Please let me know in the comments down below. I always learn something from you guys, and it's always very interesting to hear what you all have to say. Thank you so much for watching. Mannix out.